I'd like to call to order the Lane County Board of Commissioners regular meeting for Tuesday afternoon, January 23rd, 2018. And we are on to item 12, Public Works. Item A, the third reading and public hearing, ordinance number PA 1349 in the matter of amending the Rural Comprehensive Plan to redesignate land from forest land to agricultural land, to rezone land from impacted forest land F2 to exclusive farm use E40, and adopting savings and severability clauses, file 509 PA 16-05160. And I think we've got Amber Bell to present to us. So as we get started, I got to jump from one thing to the next. Let me explain the purpose and the rules. I guess we can do that after staff presentation or before we jump into the public hearing.
Actually, if you would, read the purpose and rules and then open the hearing, and then staff will provide the full staff report.
Great. So the purpose and rules of the hearing, the decision is subject to plan amendment and rezoning criteria cited in the agenda cover memo and attachments included in Lane Code 16.400 for Rural Comprehensive Plan amendments, Lane Code 16252 for zone changes, Lane Code 16004, and Lane Code 12050 statewide planning goals and Rural Comprehensive Plan policies for forest and agricultural lands. The subject property identified as map and tax lot number 18050640000300, and it is located at 25443 Fleck Road. The date is January 23rd, 2018. This hearing is subject to the county's procedures for a de novo public hearing found at Lane Code 14.300. The order of proceedings for this hearing will be first the report by staff, followed by the applicant's testimony, testimony of persons in favor, testimonies of other persons, additional comments by staff, and then the applicant's rebuttal. Evidence and testimony must be directed towards the approval criteria and criteria believed to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to enable a response may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Failure of the applicant to raise a constitutional or other issue relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow a response to the issues precludes action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the public hearing, any participant may request that the record be left open to provide an opportunity to present additional written evidence or arguments regarding the application. And I understand we've received a written request to hold the public record open for a week. The board's decision may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals in accordance with ORS 197. So before we open the public hearing, I want to call for disclosure of board member ex parte contacts and for abstentions due to conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or biases. Commissioner Sorensen.
I have none.
Commissioner Lyken.
None.
Commissioner Williams.
None.
Commissioner Farr.
I have none.
So I will note that I have talked with neighbors of this particular application in the past relative to the wedding venue that's next door, and there was a mention of a possible winery going in on adjacent property, but those conversations were at least a year ago, I'm not quite sure, and really aren't relevant and will not have any part in my decision on this application. So with that, are there any challenges to the hearing authority's qualifications to hear the matter? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing and call for the staff report. So Amber.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an applicant-initiated minor rural comprehensive plan amendment and zone change application. To your right on the screen is a vicinity map showing the subject property. It's located on the north side of Fleck Road, southeast of Veneta at 25443 Fleck Road. The application proposes redesignation of about 58 acres from forest land to agricultural land and a concurrent zone change for the same land from impacted forest land F2 to exclusive farm use E40. So this shows the existing plan designation of forest. Right here you can see the proposed plan designation of agricultural, existing zoning impacted forest lands F2, and the proposed zoning of exclusive farm use E40. Before I provide the full staff report, I would like to introduce Ann Davies, Principal Attorney with LCOG, for those of you who do not know her. Ann has been assisting Land Management Division with processing some plan amendments recently due to the high volume of plan amendments that we've received within the last year. Plus, she's assisted in review of this application, and she will be available to answer questions. As you may recall, the board held a second reading only on December 19th and scheduled this hearing today so that staff could provide notice to parties that participated at the Planning Commission hearing and were inadvertently left off of the initial public hearing notice. That re-notice has since been provided on January 2nd for the hearing today. To provide some background on the subject property, for at least the past 50 years, the property's been primarily in farm use. It's mostly open pasture and grass land, and it's been used for hay production. The property is currently run as an equestrian facility, and it contains a single-family dwelling, carport, barn, and riding area. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on this matter on April 18th. They held the record open, and then they held deliberations on August 1st of 2017, at which time they voted unanimously to recommend board approval. Bonneville Power Administration comments and some other written testimony have been received since the publication of the staff report and the first and second readings. We've distributed copies of these comments to each of the commissioners, and copies are also available for public viewing at the back table at the back of the room. In Mr. Malone's testimony, as the chair has noted already, he has requested to hold the record open for 7 days or for a week to allow new testimony and evidence. I'll address some of the comments, but I'd first like to address the main criteria applicable to this application. So the main focus of the plan amendment criteria is whether the property is better suited for forest or agricultural designation. The subject property is designated forest and zone F2 for forest use, but again, it has been predominantly and currently is in farm use. Per state law, the property qualifies as agricultural land because it's comprised of Class 1 through Class 4 agricultural soils. That's defined in the OARs as agricultural land, and it's also predominantly comprised of high-value agricultural soils. It also qualifies as forest land because it's capable of producing more than 50 cubic feet per acre per year of wood fiber. So when the property qualifies as both agricultural and forest land, as this one does, the OARs for the forest statewide planning goal specify that the plan need only document the factors used to select the plan designation. In Lane County, the Rural Comprehensive Plan Agricultural Working Paper directs us to evaluate local circumstances to evaluate this. And in this case, staff find that the local circumstances do dictate the proposed agricultural zoning. For example, there's Bonneville Power Administration lines that are present on the property. Those prohibit growing of trees and commercial forest activities because of that, and that's noted in the BPA comments that have been distributed today. 68% of the soils are suitable for forest uses compared to 100% that are suitable for farming. There's current and historical farming use on the property again. Surrounding areas are mostly in residential or agricultural use, and the applicant asserts generally that it's unfeasible to convert the property from its current use to commercial forest use. The proposed change will allow some additional uses that are not allowed under the current zoning and designation. Specifically, the exclusive farm use designation would allow relative farm help dwellings, agritourism, and winery and associated events, to name a few. One of the main focuses of the proposed findings is whether any of these newly allowed uses would conflict with identified Goal 5 resources that include wetlands, groundwater, watersheds, and big game range. The proposed findings conduct a full Goal 5 EC analysis related to these resources and concludes that any possible impacts on the Goal 5 resources resulting from new possible uses do not warrant denying the application. So one of the comments that we received since the publication of the staff report notes that there's nothing detailed in land management's brief outline of special use permits that mandates those activities be held on the vineyard, excluding adjacent property. Staff note that wineries are allowed subject to specific perimeters on land that's zone exclusive farm use. They're not a listed use in the impacted forest land zone. Other uses are allowed in conjunction with a winery, but again, a winery is allowed on a property that's zone exclusive farm use. So therefore, you can interpret that those events and activities allowed in conjunction with a winery are allowed on the property that's zoned for EFU. Regardless if events are proposed in the future in conjunction with the winery, an applicant would need to propose administrative or director level review, and that would be reviewed by Land Management Division. Concerns about traffic and parking impacts have also been raised with regards to potential future uses. Again, the plan amendment and zone change proposal itself does not allow any specific development. No proposal for development has been made at this time. These impacts can be considered only as much as they're related to the criteria, and in this case, transportation planning has reviewed the proposal and found that it will not likely result in significant changes in traffic volumes, changes in functional road classification, and that a traffic impact analysis is not required. And therefore, they found that the proposal is consistent with statewide planning goal 12. Staff have not yet had the opportunity to fully review Mr. Malone's letter that was submitted just earlier this morning. In conclusion, as addressed fully in the agenda cover memo and the proposed findings, staff find that all other criteria have been adequately satisfied and therefore concur with the Planning Commission's recommendation to approve this application, and we're available to answer any questions that the board may have.
Questions of staff? Seeing none, then we'll move on to hear the applicant and public testimony, and we'll start out with the applicant's testimony.
Good afternoon. Hey, somebody short was up here before me. That's awesome. Usually I got to pull the mic all the way down. Kim O'Day, Law Office of Bill Close, 375 West 4th Street. I'm the attorney for the applicants. As staff did a great job, again, helping out on this application. It was another big one, and it was a fantastic staff report, so I'm not going to waste a lot of your time up here saying exactly what the staff report already says. The reality of the situation, as for the last 50 years, zoning would have occurred on this property in sometime between 1982 and 1984 with the big Ordinance 884, and who knows why it got zoned forestry at that time, because we do know from a lot of the aerial photos, and at least back to 1994, it looked a lot like it looks now, which is just open farmland for field growing. And then at least back to as far as 1988, they had a special use permit for an equestrian facility, which is also an agricultural use. So we know that this has been an agricultural use for a very, very, very long time. All we're proposing to do is change the plan designation zoning so that we can continue those agricultural uses and do other agricultural uses that the clients want to do. What you're going to hear today is a lot of testimony about use, I think, which is completely irrelevant to the application in front of you. Whatever uses we tend to propose in the future, most of them that have the concerns anticipated by opposition are going to require some sort of other permit, where all those things are going to be looked at individually. Right now, we're just plan change zoning. The applicants have no plans to change what they're doing in the near future. They're just going to continue doing what they're doing and hopefully do some maybe small other things that can bring in some more agricultural money to their property. They're just trying to make a living on their property like so many farmers are out there. So there is a table in the record that lists a lot of the more intensive uses in farmland and forest land, and shows that basically, depending on which of those uses you pick, it's kind of a wash between water and traffic and all those things. I mean, there are some intensive uses allowed in F2, and there's some intensive uses allowed in EFU, and you get to pick and choose between those. And so if you pick and choose between those, the uses and the impacts pretty much are a wash, because some are more intensive than the other. It's just the way it is. Short of that, I got to the table. I hear that the records have been left open. I didn't actually get a chance to read the stuff that was put into the record, so I'm assuming we'll discuss the briefing schedule when we're all done here today. Any questions for me?
Nope, thank you.
Yeah.
That in less than 3 minutes. So,
I'm not real close. I don't need a full hour.
So testimony of folks that are in favor, I have Andrew Head, and that is he. And if I can try and get you to hold it to around 3 minutes also.
No problem. So I'm Andrew Head at 25519 Fleck Road, property to the east of the Nick and Cindy's property. I was here a year or two ago in regards to doing a wedding venue that was denied, and Luba agreed that the county has the right to make their own decision, so here we are. So the only thing that I'd like to say is that we, on the first 15 acres, have leased that property and are growing grapes, or going to be growing grapes, planting in March. We have no future use right now. Winery Nick and Cindy own that property. It's nothing that we have in the foreseeable future. That's a lot of money. But yeah, as far as being able to take care of the grapes that are going to be in the ground, we are been talking with the DSL, the water master, as well as trying to figure out how to water, because I know it's a concern from some of the neighbors to be able to water things, or the use of water, I should say. And so we are intending on irrigating out of that. As far as traffic and stuff, that property is a huge property. I don't think that that's an issue. It is already being used to board horses, and there is traffic there already. As far as our labor, we will need more than the 10 employees that are allowed on a special use permit. So when we do our harvests, so we are helping to get this thing done. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Any questions you guys have for me?
No questions, thank you.
All right.
So we'll move on to testimony from other persons, and I have Rindy Spicer. Oh, okay.
My name is Andrew Mulkey. I forgot to sign up on the sign-in sheet. I
Okay.
didn't realize, but I'm here on behalf of Sean Malone. He couldn't make it to the hearing today. My address is...
State your name. Oh.
Yeah, Andrew Mulkey, and my address is 1375 West 13th Avenue in Eugene. Here on behalf of Rindy and Cody Spicer, Timothy and Carly Payne, Jan B. Hall, Tracy Engholm, and Laura McCollum. And just briefly like to go over the comments that Mr. Malone submitted earlier today. Again, I'd ask that you leave the record open for 1 week. But essentially, what is happening is, ironically, although this piece of land is being proposed to be switched over to agricultural uses, that change in zoning will actually intensify the uses allowed on the property, and allow, winery and associated event uses, even restaurants, concerts, events. All of these things are more akin to urban uses, and they will very much impact the surrounding area and the surrounding neighborhood, and conflict with the surrounding rural residential kind of character of the area. And so all this does come into play in the Goal 5 EC analysis, looking at economic and social impacts to groundwater, wetlands, big game, surface water, all of those things. There are concerns about groundwater and water quantity and quality in the area, and so that must be addressed in the EC analysis. And in general, the EC analysis provided by the staff is simply just too cursory. It doesn't get enough into the actual details of the conflicts with big game, groundwater, wetlands, and Sean has laid that out in his comments and will probably do so more in the week to come. And part of this change and kind of intensification of the uses that can occur on the property, really shows that this proposal doesn't comply with Lane Code 16.400 sub 6H sub 3 and all the little subsections below that. For instance, this zone change is not necessary to preserve or maintain ag lands. This property has been put in agricultural use and has been in agricultural use for a very long time. And so what actually will happen by switching it over to the ag zone is that you allow these other secondary uses like, wineries and all the event-related uses that can allow them to build more structures and things like that. And so you're not preserving or maintaining agricultural land. You're actually taking that land away because you're allowing more intensive development on the property. And that comes into, gets into conflicts with trying to comply with Comprehensive Plan Goal 3, Policy 3, and Comprehensive Plan Goal 3, Policy 8. Basically, Policy 3 says that the purpose is to reserve the use of the best agricultural soils exclusively for agricultural purposes. And these are, some of the best agricultural soils. And yet the zone change is going to allow development on those soils, secondary to like winery uses and agritourism. And Policy 8 has to deal with conflicts with rural residential uses. And the intent of that policy is to minimize the conflicts between agricultural uses and rural residential uses. And that criteria is not met here. Winery uses, events, concerts, all of those things will conflict with rural residential uses. And unless you have any questions, just refer to the written testimony that was submitted, and once again ask that you hold the record open. Thank you.
Thank you. So, does the rest of the people want to? Were you speaking for them, or do they all want to testify that are signed up also? Okay, I just want to clarify that. So then I will call Rindy Spicer. If you'll state your name and address for the record.
Yes. My name is Rindy Spicer, address 25490 Fleck Road. Our property is kitty corner to the right, southeast, if you will. I feel like this is an ongoing process. I know that we're in the technicality of speaking to uses, forward uses. As a neighbor, what I see the past 3 years of the debacle, whether or not a wedding facility should be in our neighborhood. And then going through that and showing the traffic reports and showing the noise reports that show that it would rudimentally change the neighborhood, the traffic. And we have those reports. They are not in this record, and I can share those. So now I see the same individual that is next door leasing this property. And what is the difference? And we question, well, what will this zone change allow you to do that you can't right now? And at the same time, you're adding the variable of this neighbor who we've fought for 3 years that we don't want this activity in our neighborhood. So going from F2 to EFU, what better is this going to do for our community and our neighborhood? Because I see a lot of yellow and a lot of green and a lot of residential families in the area. And when I think of the future possibilities, because you have to look at the worst case scenario, I just do, and you look at the future use under a winery, and even recreational marijuana comes under the usage of this. What lifestyle does that bring to our neighborhood? What is the potential? I see grapes growing right now. The inquiry in the beginning of the stage was for the purpose of a winery. It's stated for a winery. So our mind goes to a winery. What does that mean to us as a neighborhood? What does that do to our homes? It means more traffic. It absolutely does. I'd be happy to share the traffic report that was from the other applicant to show what it would do to our neighborhood. We had those engineering reports done for noise and venues. We have to look at this wide-eyed of what is the possibility, what good can this do? We want, like Andrew was saying, for the better. We want to better the agricultural use of the neighborhood. This area is predominantly residential. To the southwest, the only EFU property there, it's unused. It's a swampland, wetland area. To the right, the closest EFU off on its own, you're looking at haying and cattle's. Not a lot of activity in the neighborhood. But the main square here, I mean, we're within 2,000 feet, 1,500 feet of the urban growth boundary of Veneta. It's residential. So I look at the future use of what is the possibility that I'm going to have bringing my child home, and I see more and more activity. Even as it stands right now with the growing of the grapes and the planting and the activity, there is more traffic. There absolutely is. We're dealing with more interference in our lifestyle. And I understand things change and lifestyles change, and we look at the opportunity to make money and to make our life better. But the progression of the neighborhood, I don't see us going backward and allowing industrial commercial activities to occur. We have to look at this. What is the long-term goal? And water is a concern. He even shared that they're walking through this. How are we going to water 20 or 15 acres of grapes? Our well is 80 feet deep. That there's great concerns. We don't have thankfully for the snowpack we're getting right now, but those are concerns that we have. Water, traffic, and when it comes down to it, noise and activity. The employees, over 10 employees. That is of great concern, because on the flip side, the home occupation was 5, and that didn't work. As we said, it will change the dynamic of the neighborhood, and that is our great concern. Appreciate your time. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So John McCollum.
Yeah, my name is John McCallum. My wife and I, Laura and I, live at 25380 Fleck Road in Veneta, which is right across the street from Nicholas's property. We have lived there for 46 years. I am speaking not so much in opposition to the zone change, but to keep this change from being used as a Trojan horse to allow the revival of the illegal Grand Hollows Event Center next door, and to oppose the introduction of a light industry. In the original denial of Grand Hollows, the hearings officer said that the issue was the change in the fundamental nature of the neighborhood. That is my main point here. I have no problem with growing of grapes across the road, although we miss watching the horses that used to graze there. The Mickleses have always been good, quiet neighbors. The land has been in pasture for the 46 years that we have been there, and I think at least 20 years before that. So I do not think that the growing of grapes is controversial. The grapes have already been planted and an irrigation pond already dug. I do have concern about a winery there. Mr. Head, who owns the illegal Grand Hollows Event Center immediately to the east of this property, is leasing this property and paid the $12,000 fee for this application. I understand that he has described this enterprise as a winery. A winery is a light industrial operation. It uses water and produces effluents and smelly wastes, and has failed to attempt to get approval for the wedding center. Mr. Head produced a water study that stated there is plenty of water in the rock under the Fleck Road area. That study seems to be irrelevant to our land. The rock under us is bone dry. We get our well water from the subsoil above the rock. A few years ago, our pump burned out when the water got very low. I noticed that they have dug a very substantial pond in the field, and I'm concerned that the irrigation and industrial water needs of this operation are a threat to us. My other main concern is that Mr. Head will try to use some land use law fine print regarding wineries to allow his illegal event center to reopen. Apparently, wineries can have wine tasting parties and can host weddings. We are concerned that this language could be used. Mr. Head originally applied for a permit to build a barn to house chickens and rabbits. What he built was a 2-building event center. These buildings have multiple kitchens, a bar, a dance floor, an apartment suite, and chandeliers. I cannot read Mr. Head's mind, but it would seem that a reasonable person could ask if that application was deliberately deceptive. He held several events there with loud noises and large numbers of people drinking. As I said before, when we objected, the Grand Hollows Event Center was rejected. The hearings officer said that it fundamentally changed the nature of the neighborhood. I think that the important point here is that the center was not rejected on the basis of the minutiae or fine print of the law, but rather on the basic principle of land use law. Mr. Head was ordered to stop holding events and to remove the non-agricultural parts of the buildings. The buildings are still intact. He has held a small number of events as well. At one time, he told the land use officer that an event was not taking place. When the officer arrived at Grand Hollows, she saw an event going on. My understanding that he was fined $1,000. These facts are in the public record. I'm not characterizing anything about Mr. Head. I'm just repeating one of the many variations of Wordsworth, quote, "I can't hear what you're saying, sir. Your actions are standing behind you and shouting louder than your words." I think that it is reasonable for us to be cautious about an attempt to revive that Grand Hollows Event Center. My main point is the same for the large event center and the industrial winery, which is that we don't want to change the fundamental nature of our neighborhood. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Jan Hall.
Good afternoon. I'm Jan Hall. I live at 25514 Fleck Road. Randy used the word kitty corner. I use the word cattywampus. From the property, I live southeast of the property on the south side of the road. And I am concerned about the change in the neighborhood. I raise my kids there. My granddaughters come out frequently. My main concern, I think, is that there's a history of doing things, getting caught, and applying for the permits after the fact. That's my concern with this also. The 5,000 square foot chicken coop with the chandeliers, 4 chandeliers, and the fireplace is still standing. And that was what was used for the wedding venue. And that's the concern. All of us in the neighborhood are concerned that it's going to be back to what we fought for 3 years and went through 4 hearings and got denied, that it's going to come back. I have no problems with them growing grapes. I do have problems with, did they have a permit for that big hole he dug behind the barn and behind the grapes to the north of them? Is that a pond? Was there a permit provided? I mean, I know at one point there was no permit for it. My concern is things are going to happen and then the county is going to give the permit after the fact. And I want my neighborhood to stay the same. I plan on living there a long time. I've been there since 1980. And if they can still grow the grapes in forest land, let them grow the grapes. It's going to be a while before they're planted even. I don't think they're planted yet. It looks like they are, but I don't think they'll plant till March. But if they ever get to the point of producing a lot of grapes, then come back to the issue. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you.
So that's everyone I have signed up to speak. Is there anyone else that didn't get a chance to sign up that wants to speak? So then I will ask the applicant if they wish to rebut testimony.
Here's my pen. First of all, I need to clarify that 90% of the testimony you just heard has nothing to do with the subject property or the owners of this particular piece of property. They're talking about property That's over farther to the east. And so there's no pond behind the barn on this property. That's a different piece of property. There is no wedding event venue on this property. That's on a different piece of property. And there's certainly none of that stuff that's supposedly in the record because it's all irrelevant to this application and it's in a record that closed a long time ago. So I just want to make clear that most of that testimony isn't even relevant to the subject property. I appreciate that the folks here feel that they have a crystal ball and know what these particular clients, who the Michelases, are planning on doing with their property based on what their neighbor has tried to do in his property in the past. That is simply not the case. They are not anticipating a winery. The Michelases are not anticipating a winery, even if that was relevant to this plan change, zone change application. The people who are telling you that a winery is an industrial use have obviously not read the statutes. It's an agricultural use. It's not an industrial use. In your how many years sitting on the Board of Commissioners, how many times have you seen someone try to go from F2 to EFU? If you go back in the history of all time, you might find what? 2, 3 applications. Nobody wants EFU. Everybody wants F2 because you can do more on F2 land than you can on EFU land. And to go through and look at it, all you need to do is look at the code. There are intensive uses allowed on F2 land. They could change their use at any point from this forward to those intensive uses on F2 land. Even industrial forestry, as people are liking to throw that word out so much. So some of that I take a bit of issue with. But I do want to thank Mr. Mulkey for making my point for me, which is agricultural land is supposed to be preserved for the highest agricultural soils in the county. And that's what we're doing here. We have a piece of property that has super high soils that's already been proven as good agricultural land, and we're trying to take the zoning and the designation that was approved by LCDC and all the uses that have already been determined to be agricultural uses by LCDC and the state legislature and put them on this agricultural land. So you heard that we were trying to change things to not protect farmland, but what we're trying to do is implement the state system, which puts a plan designation and a zone designation on land that needs to be agricultural land and protect it pursuant to Senate Bill 100 and the protections of Oregon land use law for agricultural lands.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Mr. Chair. Ms. O'Day, thanks so much for your testimony. Again, can you identify on the map that's right up there where the property is with the barn that was converted to the wedding venue?
That would be just east. I think it's tax lot 201, if I can read it from here, just east of the subject property, a bit of a panhandle lot.
Is that to the right or left?
To the right, sir.
To the right.
Yeah.
And that's where the property that was the subject of the previous land use issue.
That is correct.
That's where it was.
That is
and
correct.
Your client's property is in the red?
Correct.
And you're pointing out that your clients are intending to put grapes on the currently zoned F2 property?
That is correct.
And you're asking that it be changed to?
Well, they're changing the use on the property and allowing some grapes. The plan change zone changes so they can continue to do agricultural uses on the property that's already agricultural in use. Yes.
And is currently F2?
Yes, correct.
And this hearing right here, this proceeding is all about whether or not that should be changed to ag.
Correct.
Okay.
That is the end all and be all of this particular hearing. Any uses we should propose in the future, especially to become special uses, are going to need separate permits.
Yep. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So with that, if there's no further testimony, we can close the public hearing, but we need to hold the record open. I want to, before I ask for, doing that, do we need to do that as we close the public hearing, or can we just close the public hearing and discuss the record afterwards?
Yeah, you can close the public hearing.
All right, so I'm going to close the public hearing, and then we'll move on to discussion and action by the board and probably want to first ask staff to give us maybe if we were going to make a motion to approve this reading and set another reading, so because of the record being held open, what are the time periods we should be describing for holding the record open, to what date, to additional information in response to the submittals during that period, and then applicant's rebuttal, all those good items. If you can walk down that so that Commissioner Lycan can write them down carefully so that he can make a good motion later.
So if the board set is a 1 week period for the open record for submittal of new testimony and evidence, and a 1 week period thereafter for rebuttal, and a 1 week period for applicant's final argument, I think that lands somewhere around February 13th. Staff would appreciate some time to assemble the board packet for a fourth reading, and so March 20th would be a date that would be feasible.
March or February 20th? Did you?
March 20th
Okay.
would be great.
What was the 13th?
Yeah, I think he was following the 1 week, 1 week, 1 week.
Okay.
Was to the 13th was the final argument. So the 30th would be the end of the public record. Would close on the 30th. The rebuttal would be
20.
No. If we're going to do the usual 777 routine, it's 7 days for anybody to submit new evidence,
Okay.
that is written evidence, which would bring you to the 30th. And then there's an additional week for rebuttal to that new evidence. And by that rebuttal, I mean either evidence or argument having to do with the new evidence that's come in.
Mm-hmm.
And then one final week for written argument from the applicant as final rebuttal.
Yeah, which shouldn't be evidence, it should be argument. Right.
The final week, yes.
Get
That's
that?
the 13th.
Yeah.
And then if I may add, if any testimony or rebuttal or the applicant's final argument could be submitted by 4 p.m. to the Public Works Land Management Division offices.
Yeah, 4 p.m. on each of those days.
So,
That, and then we would have the fourth reading and deliberations on March 20th. Commissioner Sorensen?
yeah, I just wanted to just recall getting an email about our schedule Ms. Jones put out. So the board is meeting not meeting on March 6 and 7, but meeting on March 13, 14, and March 2021. Is that? So March 20 is a good day.
Yeah, actually, I'm seeing it the other way around.
Yeah, that's why
March 20, I've got March 20 as a down day.
Okay. So I'm looking at the schedule of countywide calendar for March 2018, and the 6th, the board's meeting February 27, not meeting March 6, meeting March 13, not meeting March 20, not meeting March 27. And so,
Okay, I just got a note from Diana saying March 20 is up. We do have a board meeting.
yeah, okay. Well, that's what the calendar says.
Okay.
Okay, good.
20th is good.
Okay, so 20th is fine.
Yep.
Sorry for that, but I think that was a very recent change. So you got all those dates and everything?
I think so.
All right, other than questions about record dates and everything else, are there any other discussions, questions for the board, and any direction about modifying ordinance or any of those issues before we move to a motion? I'm not seeing any. So with that, is there a motion? Commissioner
I'll give it a
Lykin.
shot here. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of ordinance, or excuse me, I'd like to move the third reading and setting the fourth reading for March 20th at 1:30 p.m. for ordinance PA 1349 by leaving the record open for 1 week and then allowing the following until February 13th for leaving the record open and then allowing comments from the applicant and rebuttal through the 13th. Is that right? Leaving the record open 1 week.
I look at the record being open
Through
all three.
the 13th. Got it. Okay. We'll do that again. So we'll move the third reading, setting the fourth reading for March 20th at 1:30 p.m. and leaving the record open through February 13th at 4 p.m. Do you want 4 p.m.?
Yes.
Yep.
With the additional proviso of what happens in those 3 weeks.
The additional proviso of what happens in those three weeks.
What I mean is that the first week being new evidence from anybody.
Okay.
Following week for evidence and argument that rebuts the new evidence coming in the week prior. And then the final week for applicant-only rebuttal in terms of argument.
I love these land use and opportunities to be setting readings. So, okay. There's the motion.
That works.
Second.
There's a second. So I'll restate the motion for folks.
Yeah.
So it's to move the third reading and setting a fourth reading deliberations for March 20th, leaving the record open for new written evidence for 1 week, an additional week beyond that for rebuttal of new evidence submitted during that week, and then an additional final week until February 13th at 4 p.m. for final arguments from the applicant.
It's been 5 years since I've had to do this. So.
So everybody understand the motion?
Yeah.
It's clear? Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Timelines retest.
So much fun. What you're missing out on stating these motions.
So that was, just for the record, that was moved by Commissioner Lykin, seconded by Commissioner Williams. I keep forgetting to do that for Diana.
And restated by Chair Bozovich.
Okay, so after.
So moving on to item 12B on our agenda, if I can dig my agenda out from underneath all this paper, is a work session on Lane Code Chapter 14 Code Modernization and file number 509 PA 1605492. And again, we have Ms. Bell presenting, and I'll turn it over to I don't know who's.
I'll start off. Thank you, Chair Bozovich, and good afternoon, Commissioners. Staff is here today, and we're actually very happy to be here today to talk to you about this subject. It's been some time, as the board recalls, through your leadership, you directed staff to add to its long-range work program back in 2015-16, our code modernization project, which kind of started the work on updating lane code, which is it's been a number of years since it's been updated. It's been an obstacle to landowners and folks in the public trying to understand the code. So staff's been working on that. We're well underway on several amendments to both Lane Code Chapter 14, which you're going to hear about today, Lane Code Chapter 13, which deals with our land divisions, and Lane Code Chapter 16, which is our primary land use code. So Amber's going to get into the details, and this is really just a sort of an opening introduction Staff's been working closely with the Planning Commission on this project. To date, we've brought drafts of Lane Code Chapter 13 to the Planning Commission, which they have recommended approval on, a draft of Lane Code Chapter 14 to the Planning Commission, which they've also recommended approval on, and Lane Code, this work session today is on Lane Code Chapter 14, which will be coming to the board later this year for a public hearing. So Amber's going to get into the details of that. But I just wanted to give you that background and brief history on why we're here today and where we've come from. I think we've had a good success on this project to date. One of the points that I'd like to highlight is that you're going to see in pretty rapid succession staff bringing you a series of code amendments, and it may seem like they're coming fast and furiously, but this has actually been a long, iterative, and deliberate process since 2015 to develop these code updates. We've worked closely with the community, with stakeholder groups, bringing these recommendations through the Planning Commission, and have a number of drafts ready for hearing and for your review. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amber.
Thank you. So in this work session, we'll be introducing amendments to Lane Code Chapter 14, our procedures ordinance that provides a framework and requirements for the submittal and processing of land use applications and appeals, as you know. As Keir mentioned, this is a high-level overview and introduction to the amendments. It's intended to provide the board with a sense of the direction that the draft is headed. We plan to return the board for a work session and a public hearing with a tentative date of March 13th, and at that time we'll provide a more comprehensive description of the amendments that are proposed. We'll be introducing the approach we've taken to modernizing Chapter 14 today, summarizing the Planning Commission's recommendation, summarizing some of the major revisions made to the draft since the Planning Commission review based on further technical and legal review. And then we have a couple policy questions for the board's consideration, and we'll welcome questions from the board. Overall, the Code Modernization Project aims to implement current statute and Oregon administrative rules and address outdated references. And also, it's intended to simplify the code and create a more user-friendly experience, and that's done by providing a more logical structure and reformatting, using white space, bolding, and page and section breaks. In addition to these objectives, Chapter 14 amendments are intended to modernize the county's review procedures and nomenclature and provide more clarity to staff and the general public in these procedures. As part of this, we've added Type 1 through Type 4 procedure terminology. This terminology is more modern. It's used by other jurisdictions. It's recommended in DLCD's model code for resource zones that we are currently working on with Chapter 16. So it will work in conjunction with proposed forthcoming amendments to Chapter 16 zoning chapters. Just to give you a summary of these procedures, the Type 1 procedure is an administrative procedure type. It's without notice or hearing or appeal period, and it involves only the application of clear and objective standards. Type 2 is a director review that includes public notice, usually no public hearing unless the director elects to elevate the application to a hearings official hearing. There is a 12-day appeal period, and it can involve the application of either clear and objective standards or conditional use criteria. Type 3 is usually a hearings official review, involves notice and a public hearing. Generally the same types of standards as a Type 2 application, except that these applications are usually more controversial and or complex. And then Type 4 applications, those are plan amendments and legislative proposals typically. It involves Planning Commission review and a recommendation, and then board review and a decision, notices, and opportunity to appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. As mentioned previously, the Planning Commission's reviewed the proposal. The public hearing was held on April 4th, 2017, and then it was continued to June 20th. The Planning Commission deliberated, and they did have a few recommendations for revisions. Based on the Planning Commission's revisions, we've clarified that a quasi-judicial zone change is a Type 3 procedure. We've also clarified that the 1-year limit on refiling of a denied application does not apply to type 1 administrative applications. And we've added some additional criteria for the director's suspension or revocation of a decision made in error. That's existing language in the adopted version of Chapter 14. And I'll discuss that a little bit more. There are a number of other revisions that we've since made based on additional technical and legal review. And again, I'll just focus on the major changes, and we'll provide a more comprehensive description of the changes when we returned to the board in March. So some of those include Chapter 14 included an option for the hearings official to request a board interpretation midway through the proceedings on a land use application. We've omitted that for a couple of reasons. It can constitute potentially a separate decision that can be appealed, and it also may pose some issues with meeting required timelines. And because of those things, it's rarely used. In light of a recent LUBA decision, we've added fee submittal as a requirement for processing of a type 1 or 4 application and as an approval criterion for type 2 and 3 applications. Modification of application is a new process that is proposed with the Chapter 14 amendments. It's the idea that if an applicant would like to submit substantially new materials to an application that's already been deemed complete, they will need to do so by submitting a form, a fee, and a timeline extension. We made a few minor revisions to this section, clarifying that the process only allows for a timeline extension of up to 215 days. That's set language in state law. And then we've also added a new application section that applies when a revision would change the proposed use or applicable criteria entirely. The adopted version of Chapter 14 does not include LUBA remand procedures that are set forth in state law, and so we've added those into the appeals section. We've also made some slight revisions to the elect whether or not to hear section to be more consistent with the current version of Chapter 14. And then we're also looking into some further revisions considering the number of elect not to hear appeals that have been made to the board in the past couple of years. So we're looking at kind of streamlining the process and simplifying that process to the extent that we can. And then also there's some on the record hearings procedures in the in section 14070, the hearings procedures, and we're looking to consolidate those with the appeals procedures so that the board could consider whether additional testimony or a de novo hearing or a remand to the hearings official is warranted at the time that the board makes the elect whether or not to hear determinations. So that's something that we'll be looking at further and bringing back to the board in March. The draft presented to the Planning Commission included a Type 4 application time window that required privately initiated plan amendments be submitted from October 1st to December 31st. This would allow some more predictability around the number of plan amendments that we receive in any given calendar year and help assist in planning for the processing of those plan amendments. However, we received some general concerns about this provision when it was reviewed at the Planning Commission level. So we've omitted it for now, but if the board so directed, we could add it back in. Also, the revocation or suspension by the director is a process currently in 14, and the Planning Commission mentioned this previously. The Planning Commission had recommended the addition of criteria for revocation or suspension of a decision that was made in error, including costs incurred from necessary technical studies, engineering, surveying, and permitting costs. However, based on additional review, it was determined that permitting costs are almost always associated with the development proposal, be it land use applications or building permit applications, and therefore staff have omitted that language, permitting costs, in this draft. We could add it back in, I think, with a few amendments, slight revisions, and or if the board so directed. So one consideration
when you said omitted, right, then did you mean deleted or?
Yes.
Right, okay.
It's deleted. And there's a track changes version in your packet that shows the deletions, so that would be one that has been deleted. So one consideration or question would be, should we add that back in, but add the permitting costs of other agencies? And if so, what would be the threshold for permitting costs of other agencies that could be a consideration? So that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions or would like to discuss some of those policy considerations.
Just one question. You went through a lot of stuff just then. But regarding the restriction time frame for the submittal of application for, you said October to 3 December, but that's been held out for now. So in the meantime, there's any month, any day, any year, any time of the year? Okay. All right. And there may be a later consideration of adding that back in or putting that in.
If the board so chooses, we've heard concerns about this. I think in some of our early work sessions with the board, we've heard concerns from some board members as well as our planning commission. It basically takes options away from folks with the proposal of when they can submit it. One of the initial thoughts we had around it was it's really just to help staff prepare resources so we can address those actions sooner. And if, for example, we knew starting December 1 that our docket was full, we had 20 plan amendments on the, which happened in the last year, or almost 20, we would know we'd be pretty well set for that year. But if, for example, at the end of that open record or open submittal period, there was only 2 submitted, we would have the option to take applications throughout the year. There would have been flexibility built into it. It was more just to help with resource allocation, but again, we do understand the concern, so it's not in this current draft.
Okay. All right. Good. Thanks.
So I have a quick question about the revocation issue relative to permit costs. I'm looking at that section, really it's about revoking a previous decision. The director can, for things like not complying with approval criteria, or approval was secured with false information, or, based on an error. In fact, I think there's been a recent case where we found approval was granted based on factual misinformation relative to a transfer of a Measure 49 home site. So, I see what I have. Why in the world would a director's decision, why would permit costs have anything to do with a director's decision? Why, and a revocation of it? I'm not sure how permit costs even got thrown into that criteria or attempted to be put in there.
So my understanding of the intent of this additional consideration is that if a decision's the director finds that a decision was based on error, and that's a basis for revocation or suspension, that this is intended to place some sideboards around a situation where an applicant in good faith has secured permits from other agencies, like maybe it's an ODOT access permit or DSL wetland delineation and removal fill permitting fees, or DEQ 1200C permits. So in good faith, they've acted and obtained these other permits and invested other monies in technical studies or what have you, maybe even things that we require conditions for, that provides the applicant with some assurance. So
that sounds like a basis for appealing a revocation, not a criteria for issuing a revocation. Is that what I'm hearing?
The way it's currently drafted, it's a consideration for issuing a revocation or suspension of a issued decision.
I understand the logic you're making there. It makes sense that it's, should it be a criteria or should it just be something that's refunded if the county issued the decision in error and it wasn't at the fault of the applicant, but they've gone through this process and paid a number of fees? Should the county revoke the decision regardless of how many fees they've how much money they've spent, but then potentially it's a question of whether or not the county should refund some of that. That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm really uncomfortable with throwing something in there relative to permit fees and costs of an applicant. I think I would rather have that be litigated and determined by the court whether our error was made. How much culpability, how timely was the reversal, everything else that goes with that, and how much speculation was being done on part of the applicant. To blanket throw something in the criteria relative to that opens the door for us paying a lot of sunk costs to a developer should we, like in this recent case where we realized that the applicant really didn't have the rights to a Measure 49 site. What if they had, gone through drawing up housing plans and everything else? But I think then the question is was that our fault or the applicant's fault for not demonstrating clear transfer of that Measure 49 claim right? So that to me seems to be an after issue, and I think about a recent decision we made relative to once you have a partition, do old deed lines stay in place, and the person that was looking for a legal lot verification based on old deed lines versus the partition, and we basically were determining that a 2003 decision was made in error. Me, I would much rather resolve that in a civil setting about who's liable for what than try and write it into our code, because Andy's kind of sitting there going, yeah, maybe not. Yeah. But as far as I'm concerned, I think that's something that I would leave out of the code and let's deal with that in another venue. I don't think that needs to be described in code. Just my personal feeling. So any other questions about Chapter 14 changes? You guys went over an awful lot.
Yeah, we actually should have scheduled more than a half hour. Apologies for that. But again, this is a high-level discussion, and we'll have a separate work session closer to the public hearing date.
Yeah, I think there may be more questions around elect-to-hear appeals, and we've had some discussion previously about changing fee structures for that, and the ability to either refund fees or reclaim fees, all that. So we kind of left it alone for them, but as this is Chapter 14 is where it would fall.
That's absolutely correct, Chair. But we're currently scheduled to come before you specifically with a discussion on the appeal fees. We thought we were going to have we thought we'd found a silver bullet that wasn't quite the silver bullet we were hoping that it was. If we had found that, we would have proposed that with this current writing of the code. But at this point, I think what we'll do is we'll come and we'll have a conversation. I think we're scheduled at the end of February to do that. And so we can get some direction from you on how you would like to proceed with those elect to hear, elect not to hear, and reflect that in Chapter 14 when we come back.
Great, thank you. So any other questions from the board for staff on Chapter 14? And there were two particular policy items I think you guys had noted in the staff report, and I was trying to get back to them from way down in page 200 or whatever where it was. Which was the Type 4 submittal window, and we just talked about revocation criteria. But is there any direction or guidance you need from the board before we move on to the next phases of moving ahead?
I think we've gotten some good feedback today. Thank you. We'll look into the revocation and suspension criteria a little more before we return to the board in March.
Great, thank you. No further questions. Thank you. We'll move on to item 12C.
Thank you. By the way, Amber, the testimony earlier made a comment about the height of the mic, and I noticed that you had adjusted the mic knowing who was going to be stepping up, so well done.
Also remember the interference last time. Avoid that.
Oh, thank you. So as Deanna moves into place for our next item, I'll read the items. So it's item 12C. It's the third reading and deliberations for ordinance number PA 1358 in the matter of amending the rural comprehensive plan to redesignate land from agricultural to marginal land and rezone the land from exclusive farm use E40 to marginal land ML with site review MLSR, adopting supplemental supplemental findings to address deficiencies of county ordinance number PA 1317 as identified in the Land Use Board of Appeals remand of the county decision LUBA number 2016-019 and adopting savings and severability clauses, planning file 509 PA 12-05-208, and we have Ms. Bright. So let me quick flip over to the the script she so conveniently provided me and explain that the Board of Commissioners is the approval authority for these proceedings. Materials relating to this proceeding are available on the board's agenda webpage and include the supplemental staff report and revised findings. The hearing was held December 12th, 2017, and the record is closed as of December 26, 2017. Therefore, the purpose of this proceeding is the board's final deliberations on the matter. Because the hearing and record are closed, no public comment or written testimony from any party or person can be placed in front of the board members at this time. So once again, I'm going to call for ex parte contacts or abstentions due to conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or other biases. Commissioner Sorensen.
I have none.
Commissioner Lykin.
None.
Commissioner Williams.
None.
Commissioner Farr.
I have none.
And I have none. So, and I'll ask if there's anyone that wants to challenge that in the audience. Doesn't appear that anyone does. And basically, we'll go on to the staff report at this point. So, Deanna.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. For the record, I am Deanna Wright, the staff person for this file. The board heard arguments during the hearing in December 2017. The record was held open in order to allow additional testimony, which was received into the record and forwarded to you in your packets. To summarize, the issue is LUBA has remanded a board decision approving a plan amendment and zone change to marginal lands. The remand centered on the necessity for supplemental findings related to the big game Goal 5 natural resource. The previous findings needed to be bolstered and to contain expert testimony to support the applicant's request. This has been submitted by the applicant's attorney. The policy question for the board is there substantial evidence in the record for the board to make a determination whether or not the applicant's request to allow a conflict in the peripheral big game habitat area is approvable? The conflict arises when the overall residential density is greater than 1 dwelling unit per 40 acres in the peripheral big game range. The applicant's request to allow the conflict is contained in their newly proposed condition of approval to limit the conflict, which is the subject 85-acre plan designated and zoned marginal land is limited to the development of 2 dwelling units in addition to the existing dwelling unit. This proposal could result in a potential of 2 dwelling units within the peripheral big game range, which is an incremental increase of 1 dwelling over the recommended ODFW recommendation. The applicant proposed this recommended condition as a concession with the appellant, Landwatch. My recent correspondence with the appellant leads me to believe the concession condition with revised findings is accurate between the two parties. In this case, since a conflict exists within the applicant's proposal, the applicant has conducted the ESEE analysis within their supplemental findings. The option for the board at this point are 3 options according to the Oregon administrative rule and based on the ESEE analysis. The board's options include prohibit the proposed conflict, or limit the conflict, or allow the conflict. The applicant is requesting to limit the conflict.
It appears the appellant is in agreement with this concession. Therefore, staff recommends motion number 2 in your supplemental memo. With this option, we can set a fourth reading to add a site review suffix to the revised ordinance. It's not in there right now. The applicant is not opposed to the site review suffix. It merely is an indication for staff to reference the ordinance when reviewing any future development on the subject property. The site review suffix would be to limit the development to 3 dwellings within the 85-acre subject property. There is another side issue to note here. A recent remanded decision from LUBA on an unrelated application on the Hazeldale Plan Amendment issued an assignment of error regarding the county's treatment of the big game habitat. The Hazeldale Plan Amendment concerned a proposed mining and aggregate site which the county approved last year. Staff's early position under the Hazeldale application was that the applicant should address big game as significant, given that other more recent plan amendments were addressing the big game resource as a significant resource as a precaution. Hazeldale's applicant's position was that the county can only require applicants to address potential conflicts to big game habitat if it was on an acknowledged list of significant 1C sites per the OAR. Their argument was that since the RCP and the working paper never used the term significant or 1C for big game, that it was never given the classification of a significant natural resource to be protected under the Goal 5 rule. The county was persuaded to accept the applicant's position after they submitted their supplemental testimony that appeared reasonable and factual. However, upon appeal from LUBA, they disagreed and found that it was accurate to say that the county did adopt a 1C big game inventory, classifying it as significant. We have not received a remand request for Hazeldale application at this time. In the case of Iverson at hand, the applicant is treating big game as a significant Goal 5 resource and has already conducted the ESEE analysis of the conflicts, so it's not sideways to the assignment of error under Hazeldale. This concludes my staff report at this time. I'm able to answer questions now or during deliberations should they arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. And thank you for addressing the Hazeldale remand. I specifically asked about that because I was a little bit confused about the remand of the Hazeldale based on that not doing a 1C and how that applied to this particular application, which was hung up over similar issues of big game habitat. So I think you've clearly addressed that basically Hazeldale did not go through the EC because they claimed we didn't make a 1C determination on that. And the Iverson has actually accepted that it's a significant resource and went through an EC and is proposing to mitigate impacts to that resource as part of their application. So I'm happy you defined that for me because I was a little unclear, so well done. So with that, we're at deliberation and action by the board and opportunity to ask staff questions and any deliberation and make motions. So to the board. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't have any questions, so I'm just going to make a motion. I move that we move approval of ordinance PA 1358, the matter of amending the rural comprehensive plan to redesignate land from agricultural to marginal land and rezone that land from exclusive farm use E40 to marginal land MLSR and site review, adopting supplemental findings to address deficiencies of county ordinance PA 1317 as identified in the Land Use Board of Appeals remand the county decision.
Second.
So can I back us up a minute?
Yeah.
The recommendation was option 2.
Oh, it was option 2.
In the staff report, if you go to page 2 of 8 there, and it's because we're making changes.
Oh, we are.
Findings.
Yep.
We need to move to another reading. So.
Yeah, we do.
So, with permission of the second and permission of the motion maker, can we withdraw that motion?
Yes, I can.
Mr. Second, thank you. So, would you like to try again?
Yeah, I'll try again. My bad. So, what's the date that you're asking for?
We're hoping for February 27th.
Okay.
That is a
I'm not doing very good today.
And that is a board meeting.
board meeting date.
I had the wrong month open earlier. Sorry about that.
All right. We'll try that again. Mr. Chair, I'd like to move third reading and setting the second reading, or third reading, setting the fourth reading. Boy, this is what happens when you take antibiotics. They're a little strong. So anyway, third reading, setting the fourth reading of Ordinance PA number 1358, and setting the time for February 27th at 1:30.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Lycan, seconded by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Lycan.
The only discussion I have is I'm hoping to get past this stuff real quickly. So that's it.
Something's giving me a froggy.
You're sandwiched between us.
Yeah.
You haven't got a chance.
Any further discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So that gets us to
What a day.
jumping backwards in time a little bit. We're going to move into executive session next. And I want to let Neil and the folks up there at Metro TV know we will be coming back out into public session after the executive session to provide direction to staff on a human resources issue. So, and we will probably be coming out in the BCC conference room upstairs. So today, the Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to consider the employment of a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192-6602 A&E, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed above. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions will be made in executive session. We will come back out in a public session after the executive session. So we are going to recess and reconvene in the Board of Commissioners conference room in executive session at the gavel. Lane County Board of Commissioners back into regular session here on Tuesday, January 3rd, 2018. And we are at item 10A, Human Resources, in a matter of providing direction to Human Resources to negotiate an employment agreement. And Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at this point, I'd like to move that we direct Human Resources to negotiate an employment agreement with, we want to say William Casey Creer. All right, that's his full name.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Diana just texted me, says the mics aren't on. Can we confirm the mics are on?
They're on from our end.
Is the volume turned up?
That might have been a delayed text.
Yeah, this volume doesn't match the microphones.
Let me just see if she's... let me confirm that the mics are on and we'll move forward here. If they weren't on, I'll repeat.
Okay. Yeah, they're on. Testing.
Are they on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So mics are on.
Okay.
She says it's a go. Again, we're back in regular session. Item 10A, Human Resources. Commissioner Lycan had the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at this time, I'd like to move that the Board of Commissioners direct Human Resources to negotiate an employment agreement with William Casey Creer for the position of Performance Auditor.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion to the motion. So I'll just want to real quick say, we have been trying to fill this position for a while. We went through a very exhaustive recruitment process, had two very good candidates. I want to thank Joe, the other candidate, for coming all the way here from Arizona, wasn't it, to interview. It was interesting to look at both candidates, but Casey is exemplary. His references have checked out well, so hopefully we'll be able to negotiate something, and look forward to hearing back from Human Resources on that. Any other discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously, and for Diana's sake, Commissioner Lycan made the motion, Commissioner Farr seconded the motion. So, moving on to review of assignments.
Oh, let's see here. We have a tentative May 23rd work session, possible work session, on the two ordinances related to area spraying that were forwarded. We have two fourth readings scheduled, one February 27th, one for March 20th, and then we have a work session on Lane Code Chapter 14, tentatively scheduled for March 13th. Those are all the...
Did he miss anything? No. Sounds good. Thank you. Any other business for the board today? Seeing and hearing none, we are adjourned. See you tomorrow.
Yes, sir.